Lovely. Thank you for coming today, everybody. And so we have Raj with us today, who I've known for quite a while now, and you work geographically kind of over the road from us, don't you? Not very far.
Across the road, yep, at the Bradfield Centre. I'm here.
And because today is Careers Day, then I thought it'd be really good to get another agency owner in. So you've got a different, just a different perspective on how it all works, because the way we're structured is one way, but other agencies are structured differently. And one of the reasons I wanted to invite Raj along is because he's also worked in lots of other agencies as well. So, you've got so much experience that you can share. And you also, in your career, you've done quite a lot of hiring as well. I was going to say hiring and firing, but probably more hiring
than firing. Yeah, a couple of fires.
That's the best way, isn't it? So I can get your thoughts on that, which would be really helpful. Sure. So if you want to put any questions into chat as we go, and we'll have a conversation for a bit and then have some questions at the end. And I thought we could do it in kind of 3 sections. So we'll get some, Anuradha's webcam has just given it the ghost, just completely not playing ball. And so doing 3 sections. So we'll get some context from you, find out about your agency, your career, the sort of roles that you see that are out there. And then we'll look at skills. So not just the basics of skills that you need if you're working in more of a design-led field, but also some of the soft skills. Hybrid working feels like it's very much here to stay, doesn't it? So some of those skills that will be helpful to you when you're first starting out and you might be working a bit remotely, a bit in the office. And then I really want to get some CV, interview, covering letter, portfolio tips from you. What I do is there's a lot of kind of written word involved, and some of the ways that people might present their portfolio might be different to people that are doing more visual things. So I'd love your thoughts on that.
Of course.
Brilliant. So just tell us a little bit about the company that you've recently founded, and then go back and tell us where you've worked before.
Sure. Okay. So hi everyone. First of all, Rajen Mistry. So I'm creative director of Are&Be. So this is my brand agency, and I started it in 2019. It was a tricky year for me, and I started that in July 2019, and it's been going 3 years. So we're fully much focused on brand, so brand strategy, brand identity, and brand awareness. And focusing now on digital health and technology brands as well. So we're really kind of niche down, but my background has been in agencies of a full agency kind of capacity, starting from a long time ago now, 2001. I started in a small company in Dalmatian. It's called Dalmatian Design. And it was just up the road on the A10. And it was a very small company, but it was a graduate job, and I was really lucky to get it. They actually offered me a graduate salary, and I'd never been to Cambridge before, so I took them off on the offer. And it was the best thing for me, because it's one of those places where they only had 2 owners, they were a developer, and they wanted a designer. Now, that meant I had to kind of learn so many different things. So in some ways, whilst it's quite scary, a job like that allows you to kind of try lots of different things. I was doing website design, I was doing, back in the day, interactive CD-ROMs, things like that, which nowadays don't really exist. But it gave me the opportunity to really dabble and try a few things. But what I knew was really helpful is that the owners were super kind of supportive. So I think, going into, if you're looking for somewhere, I think, in some ways you're sort of interviewing a company as well, aren't you? When you're going to come and meet these people, they're interviewing you, but you're also interviewing the company. So I think it's good to kind of get a gist of the people and the kind of support you're going to need. And I kind of made sure, when I was doing this role, knowing I was the only designer, that was going to be something really important to me, that I'm not left to everything, but there's people who are going to be supporting me. So I'd say, one thing is to try and go into a smaller place where you get that extra support, but you also get the extra exposure. So it's a 2-way piece. Or if you go into a bigger place, obviously, you've got different kind of support there. But my career was quite interesting from Dalmatian Design. I was like a bit of a footballer in that sense, because what happened was another company in Cambridge bought Dalmatian Design. It was called Green Cathedral. Funny old name for a digital agency, but Green Cathedral, because back in the day, people talk about web and surfing the web. And Green Cathedral is a surfing term. So when the wave comes over, and the
Oh, I never
surf is
knew
in
that.
the surf is
Right.
inside the Green Cathedral, apparently. Very interesting kind of name for a brand, for a design agency. But they bought Dalmatian Design, so I kind of moved automatically into this other company. So there's something to be said for that as well, this idea of like kind of moving with the times. And I think, again, because of this is quite a while ago, I was quite one of these people who kind of, it's a loyal thing. You stick with it and you see what happens on the other side and you make the best of it. So I moved into this company, which was more of a digital focused agency. So they did web design, web development, apps and things like that. And at the time, I was working predominantly on quite B2C brands. So we were quite lucky to work for brands like Center Parks. So we did a lot of work for them for about 4 years. And I was involved in a lot of the design work across that, including designing their websites, their booking engines, all kinds of things like that, which is really, really interesting. And again, in that moment, and this is something Sue and I picked up on, is this is where you really start to learn about business when it comes to the work you're doing, whether it's design or writing or development. When you're working for brands like that who have their income is going to be directly associated with the work you're doing, i.e. Center Parcs booking. So they had 25% of their bookings were online, and over 4 years we took their bookings to 85% online. So every day you're kind of learning how you're impacting the business. And I think that's super important. I would say to everyone here is, if you can start to, whatever work you're doing, ask about the business. What am I doing? If I'm writing, if I'm designing, if I'm illustrating, what impact does this have? How does it impact their business? The design I'm doing is going to improve the booking engine? Is the writing I'm doing going to attract the right customers? Those things are super important, because you're not, designers, writers, you guys are, really important. Design is business in some ways. So that's one thing I really learned in those years at Green Cathedral. And we worked on, the Open University was a client, Wonderbra was a client, really diverse range of clients that I had. And so that my first 10 years there overall were within the B2C kind of arena. And then what happened again, another company called Golly Slater, huge network agency, 10 offices around the country, but they didn't have a London presence, and we were London, Cambridge at the time, Green Cathedral. So they bought Green Cathedral outright because they didn't have a digital function in their business. They were advertising and PR. So they literally bought Green Cathedral, wanted to have digital capabilities in-house, and they just bought us, which we were about a 50-man company by that point. And I was probably a head of creative by then. I was sitting on the management team. And then I moved it. So then we got bought out, and my career just moved on to Golly Slater. So now I'm working in a network agency. We're quite integral kind of part to that, because we're like adding our digital skills to all these other parts of the business, which was really interesting. And they had really interesting clients like Visit Wales and the Army and lots of other clients like that. And we were traveling a lot more. So that was a very different kind of setup again. I was hiring a lot more people. We were building a much bigger team. We probably got up to about 10, 15 kind of creatives by that point within our own space. So you could see, like the kind of career as a designer. I was a designer, and immediately halfway through, or much earlier, I started to think about the kind of actual business elements of business aspects of the business of the role, how to hire people, how to manage people. And that's something you might want to think about as well as you grow. And especially nowadays, whilst you want to grow your career, it's not always about managing a team now. You can be a super expert within your subject instead and have seniority in that sense. But, you might be expected to then talk to clients a lot more and lead projects yourself, but you don't have to lead a team. So there's different ways to kind of go, I guess. And I think, something for you to reflect on, when it comes to your careers, like what do you like doing? You don't have to force yourself into the specific, routes. It does depend on how you take that route as well, because if you are working for bigger agencies, it's a kind of double-edged sword. They'll give you the room to maneuver, but at the same time, because you're a smaller cog in a bigger piece, they're going to need you to do the exact piece of work that they need as well, because there's a bigger kind of engine to work. Whereas if you're in a smaller agency, you have more flexibility, but there's also a lot of pressure on you to kind of get things right as well. So there's something for you to choose on which path you'd want to go down.
Yeah, because some of the really larger agencies, they'll have an account for, let's say, Adidas, you know, and I met some people at an agency event recently, and there are lots of people all working on this account for Adidas, and you know how big Adidas is, you know, so massive brand, and then all these people in the same room were working on one tiny element of it, and they all seemed a bit bored. Do you know what I mean? A bit like they didn't really know why they were there, what they were doing. And they didn't have the same kind of, not passion, but that, I suppose, that connection, you know, like you're talking about, you see the design that you're doing, that's got a real business impact. And I think, you know, again, I am biased, but when you're working somewhere a bit smaller, you've got that very direct connection to the client. You can really see the difference it makes. So it's really satisfying, you know, but then, as you say, I mean, there's nowhere to hide, is there? You can't just kind of rock up to work and think no one's going to notice. Everybody notices, and you are really important. So I think it's worth just, you know, exploring and seeing what you want to do, really. And the other thing that I've noticed, as you probably have, is that when you work in lots of different places, you learn things that you don't realize you're learning. So for example, when I was at ITV, the internal politics there, you know, in a few places that I've been where the politics have just been awful, it's just given me this, it's sort of instinctive drive to never have that here, and to always make sure things are transparent, and you don't get in this weird situation where people are kind of sniping behind each other's backs, and, you know, and that kind of thing. So I'm sure you're the same. What are those things that you've learned about running a business now that you didn't realize you were learning?
Yeah, I think running a business is very different to, you know, implementing your craft. So I've learned, whilst I've actually, my last 10 years has been working for business to business brands, helping, you know, but it's a very different selling approach. You're selling service rather than products. And whilst you're learning about business and the impact, running a business is very different. So I think when I started my agency, you know, I was typical creative, you know, wanting to do good work for good people was my simple mantra at the time.
Now you want to do terrible work for terrible people.
Now better, great work for great brands. Now I started that good. And it's been challenging, but learning how to run a business, how to attract the right clients for yourself and attract the right attract the right talent as well. So I've got a copywriter on board now, and she actually came through the Kickstart scheme. I don't know if any of you've heard that scheme, but it was a great little scheme that the government put on to help people through the system, as it were. And Jez, she luckily landed on my desk, as it were, and went through a few different CVs actually. And because it was not a very traditional route, it's people were coming through, I guess, the job seekers, the job allowance, job center, basically. It's not that they were specifically tuned to, you know, marketing or branding or design. They might have had some skills like that. So actually, it wasn't a direct, here's a job, let's get somebody in who I need. So in some ways, I had to put a lot of faith in the people that were hiring. But what happened was, I had a couple of interviews, a couple of people came to see me. And actually, you know, had a couple of trial sessions with a few people. And for me, and I've hired about probably 25 people in my time. It's, yes, you absolutely do need the skills to do the job in terms of what you're doing, whether you're a writer or a designer. But attitude sort of trumps a lot of things for me. Attitude in terms of how you might show up, how you communicate with people, what you feel about your career, what you feel about the agency that you're going to come into, what you feel about the clients you're going to be working on. Once you know all that, and once you feel comfortable with that, you know that you can work with this person, because those soft skills, as you say, you know, those challenges around the chemistry and what you might want people to do or not do is a little bit more easier to manage. And the skills that you're going to be learning on top of the ones that you already have can be taught. You can be supported through, you can find those things, you can learn creativity as well. Maybe not from an innate perspective, but just the actual process of things like that. So that's really important to kind of think about for yourselves as well. So in the end, like Jez came along, but she had a background in film and English. So she could write, she understood storytelling because of the film background, all that sort of stuff. And at the time I needed someone to help me with my marketing. As a small agency, I thought, okay, this is great, I can help. And she did really well, and she came on board, and actually just brilliant at just, writing. Because for me, as a creative, what I've learned along the way is writing is super important. If you can write, and it doesn't mean writing the perfect thing, it's just writing to enable your thoughts to come out and to be processed and to find ideas in, is really, really important. Like a lot of the branding conceptual stuff I come up with purely starts with writing. I don't do any kind of, drawing or any kind of, I start with writing. I start with, with the problem, what it is that people want to do, and then explore in that sense. So I think having Jez on board, naturally we were a good fit because I was kind of into my writing and into design, and Jez came along and I could help her with conceptual side, while she had probably the more formal side of writing covered more than myself. I'm not the best with spelling and grammar, but that we can't all be Sue Keogh. But I think just in practicing that art form, I think is really super useful.
And just tell us a little bit about R&Be. I love the name as well.
Yeah.
And just so the sort of environment that Jess is working in, tell us, what is a branding agency?
Sure.
What do you actually do?
Okay, yeah. So a bit of background on the name. R&B is a very simple name. There's myself and my wife. So I'm Rajen, my wife is Bisha. She's a creative as well. And we wanted to come up with something that was just kind of something for the future that we may do together and be part of. And so we were always called R&B, but in the traditional R&B and the music genre kind of thing. But we kind of changed the spelling of it and thought it's quite a nice name, it's quite interesting, and we just went with that. And in a cheeky way, we actually retrofitted our proposition to be: we get you from where you are to where you want to be. Very simple.
There's loads of layers to this
transformation piece there, but that's our kind of, I guess, our value proposition in that sense. A very simple one. It needs to be evolved. It has changed now, but that's the kind of whole story. So we set it up together. R&B, different name, and then the proposition that helps us do that as well.
I'll just share the screen as well. I'll just show that.
Oh, cool. So this is our new website, which just launched last night.
Oh my goodness. Fresh.
Very different.
Fresh and new.
Very different. Yeah, it's very much more, it's not your
working.
traditional design agency approach. Yeah. With the big portfolio pieces, we've gone for more of a narrative approach to explain to people, in the kind of business like digital health and technology, who may not be familiar with just big, branding agencies with lots of work. This is all the kind of work we do. We've done stuff for charities, lighting consultancies, other agencies, 2 or 3 other agencies. We've just finished a brand for a technology firm in London. We're going to be doing a brand for a software company that helps in the electric vehicle industry and low carbon tech. Hopefully going to be doing an app for London. So quite a range of things in terms of that, but focus on branding. Yes,
where does your work start and finish?
Sure.
At which point are you brought in, if you like, and where do you pass the baton to somebody else?
Sure. A brand agency is probably, in the scheme of setting up a company and then having a brand, depending on the order in which, a startup or, a company may do this. Brand agency is probably the first agency that you may probably engage, in the sense that a brand is the first thing you might want to actually create, whether it's very high level and simple, or it's a bit more sophisticated and you've got the budget to do that straight away. Ultimately, you're going to need some sort of communication around your brand strategy. Who are you? Why do you exist? How do you do things? And what do you do? They're the 4 questions you always ask yourself. And so that's brand strategy. That's what we do. And then off the back of brand strategy, there's also the messaging that comes with that. So how do you communicate? How do you articulate your offer? How do you go to market? So we do a lot of brand strategy. There you go, tone of voice, detailed messaging frameworks, etc. But there's 2 parts. There's the strategy piece at the top, which is research and then strategy. Then the middle bit is expression, as I call it, which is the messaging, so the verbal identity, and then the visual identity. Because people always talk about identity and they think it's just visual, the logo, but there's, a brand is way more than that actually. And one of the things I always say to clients is a brand is like creating the person, the personality, who you are, what you stand for, how you come across. And then the logo is actually just a badge that you wear at the end, that you put on. And my process is to go through that holistic brand process and then worry about things like a logo, because often clients they think, well, it's the logo, isn't it? That's my brand. But that's not your brand. That's just an identifier for your brand.
I think this is where sometimes, when you see in the papers, a particular organization has had a rebrand and it costs 75 million or something like that. And everyone goes, oh my God, that's a lot of money. But then they're not realize, they think, oh, that's just for redesigning a logo. But it's not, is it? It's redesigning all of the document templates and all the signage and all the, I don't know, just everything about that organization. It might be a multinational and it's got to be implemented in every single part of the organization.
Exactly, yeah. And the biggest part of it is actually talking to people. If you're rebranding, you're going to interview a ton of people. Like often I'd interview 10, 15 people just for the kind of rebrand on a small brand and talk to the people, because actually all the ideas end up coming from the people you talk to, how they say things. Because if you did just a survey and they wrote something out, it's overly considered. So there's no actual passion in the way they write something. Whereas when you have a conversation with someone, you say, so tell me about your brand or tell me about this. The way they speak is sometimes you capture all that in the transcriptions and then you use that in the work. So that's the brand agency. We'll go through that. We'll do the visual design. We'll do the verbal, and we'll end essentially a brand guideline with all the assets they may need to express their brand, their logo, their colors, their fonts, and all that sort of stuff. So at that point, we can either end the engagement, or naturally we'd want to progress as a brand guardian. And what I do is I don't really work on anything else after that, apart from like maybe brand campaigns. So, creative campaigns, things like that. Coming with, doing some initial stuff like the implementation for sales or your social and things like that. But then if you need a website or if you need a video, I'll work with other partners and get them involved and hand over the baton. Like if you're doing content with Sue, there's a big piece on that. We'll have the tone of voice or some initial things, but it's more of an 80-20 piece where Sue and her team would take on the full content marketing piece. And then I'll just be an advisor to make sure the brand is implemented onto the campaign or the content in the right way initially. And then same for the website, we'll probably do the concepts or some initial designs for something, making sure the language, the story and everything comes together on a kind of conceptual level, and then pass over to the website design company that they can then fully implement it and roll it all out. And that's how we kind of work.
We sometimes get people approaching us about the brand element as well. And so this is where we can say, well, we could, but you probably don't want us to. We've got design skills, but they're not proper design skills. You've got the proper, I think what I'd call the structure behind it. You can see the framework behind the whole visual identity. So we'd much rather say, okay, we love all this stuff, but please talk to Raj. Because he'll do a much better job. And then equally, you quite often say, oh, I've got someone that needs your kind of thing. So that's a lot of context about your background and what a branding agency is. And let's move on to talking about skills that you need in your line of work. Firstly, what about the basics? Like what tools, what software are you using nowadays? What's really, when you look at someone's CV and you think, oh, great, they can get stuck in straight away. What are you looking for there?
Just literally on the software side. Yeah, sure. So on the software side, I'd say the traditional Adobe suite is still the predominant powerhouse piece of software that people use. So that includes obviously Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign. And for myself, there's also things like XD, which is, maybe people be using things for designing websites or UI, UX. Then there's also like sometimes nowadays clients are using things like Canva a lot.
Yeah, how do you feel about Canva?
I'm happy. Canva is useful at the right point, and I think so. You kind of use the traditional software as a skilled designer or a writer or a motion designer to do all the main stuff, and then you may want to translate some of that stuff into templates on Canva. And again, we like to work with clients knowing, okay, well, if we're working with a charity client, they're not going to have designers in house. They're not going to have these expensive software. but they can have Canva because it's £100 for the year. It's a great piece of equipment, software, and people can use it. So what we do is transfer some of the designs into Canva, make templates for them, often social posts, often simple documentation if they want to create a little report for themselves, things like that they might be able to do in-house, and just change copy and change a few things around. And we'll do a little bit of training on that for them as well. So that's quite useful. So having that kind of skill, and again, it's something people could probably learn. I wouldn't expect it to be on the CV, but if it's there, and let's say there's a social media element to your job or what you're applying for, I think having Canva on your CV would be super helpful. And also nowadays, obviously, there's video is a big piece, right? So whether that's from a storytelling perspective, creating videos, or assisting from a brand perspective, bringing brands to life in motion identity, and that sort of stuff. So maybe, After Effects or Premiere Pro could be a bonus to have on your CV as well. So I think if you can learn elements like that, I mean, even I'm still learning things like that. The other day I just went on YouTube. There's a guy doing 15 minutes Premiere Pro in 15 minutes, and it literally was 15 minutes, and it actually gave me everything I needed to get started for what I needed to do on something. So utilize the things out there. But that's what I would look for in a CV if you're talking about software. But obviously, I work with working with clients, and I talked again about business. I'd say having the ability to use PowerPoint, whilst it is, oh my God, PowerPoint, actually it's a ubiquitous tool in the business industry. People still use it. The biggest brands still use PowerPoint. Maybe use Google Slides, but ultimately that presentation software is used. It's used for design as well now. I will use PowerPoint to design certain decks. Certain like tone of voice guidelines would be used, because I know that I'm going to have to hand it to clients who want to dabble as well. They want to dabble around. They want to put things in. They want to extend their brand guidelines. So the best format is sometimes things like that allow for better collaboration.
Well, we've been going around in circles actually trying to work out the best way to present strategy documents. And then recently we've thought, actually, should we just be doing this in PowerPoint instead of trying to overcomplicate it? But it seems to have this kind of aura about it that we all hate PowerPoint, whereas actually it's really useful.
It is useful.
And in fact, we did this brilliant exercise yesterday where everyone had to pitch us an idea for a creative promo, and some people use PowerPoint, and it was great because you could just open it up, crack on, off you go. Okay, so that's a bit on some of the basic tools that are useful. What about soft skills? So particularly when you're just starting out, what are those skills that are going to get you far?
If you're starting out, for me, I would say again, so I'll just jump into a little bit on the CV side if you're okay to say that. I've got a little bit of a bugbear with CVs. I'll start with my bugbear, and that is when people come to me with CVs, and it's off, and sometimes, and I know why this might be the case. There are templates out there, and I blame the people who put the templates out there. But the templates that come with a scale of the use of your tool. So you'll say Photoshop 7.
Oh yeah, don't bother with that. Yeah. Do you not use it like that
3.
as well? Yeah.
No. Yeah. I don't, have you already gone over this one?
No, I haven't. But it's really funny. It's something that I've never actually said out loud to anybody.
Yeah,
whenever
I
get a CV like that, when I get a CV like that, I think, well, that's really nice that you've done that. But it's, I don't know. Tell me more about why you find that off-putting.
Yeah, because I think it's off-putting because there's no quantifiable. How can you quantify you're a 7 at Photoshop and think? So people use these templates to do that, and actually, all of this becomes. You can see you've seen this template many hundreds of times even, and straight away you're put in the category of like, well, this you've not thought about how you want to come across yourself, and you've not actually thought about the impact of your skills. So I would say, trying to kind of think about your soft skills in terms of the impact you have, talk about the results that you actually kind of, I know you're just starting out, but even just to kind of say, look, these are things I do, and this is why I do them, and this is the impact I could have. Even if you haven't, you could, just think about it a bit more proactively. Because if you think about it, if people are hiring and everyone's come with a Photoshop 7 and Illustrator 7, how are you actually going to kind of differentiate people? So actually telling a story about who you are and communicating a bit more about the impact you have on things and your aspirations and also all these extra skills that you might have if you dabbled in a few different things, I think it's definitely worth putting down. So I think soft skills for me, writing, as I said earlier, is really important. So how you've written your CV is super important, how you've told a story about yourself. Because I'm quite an advocate now, and I would say to everyone here is that to kind of build a bit of a personal brand. I think if you can start to build a personal brand in the simplest sense of, you know who you are, you know how you communicate, you might have a simple website, to where you can house your work, whether it's writing, illustration, design, whether you're a project manager and you just want to say this, you just got a site about who you are and the fact that you're into this sort of stuff. I think that's really important. So I think that combination of this personal brand, CV, and the way you present yourself, I'd say is really important, I think, when it comes to your soft skills. But yeah, communication is super important in a brand or a design agency. Whilst you feel like you might be just kind of doing the work, there's going to be a lot of occasions when you're going to have to express your ideas to your senior designer or creative director, or potentially in front of a client. So I think those things are really important, that you can communicate your ideas and you feel comfortable talking about
and
those.
How do you get that confidence? Because particularly when you're first starting out, design and a lot of creativity can feel so subjective, and it can be really nerve-wracking when you want to say, I've got this idea, and you're thinking, oh God, everyone else around me is really senior and they know what they're doing. Oh, this idea is probably rubbish. Oh, they won't like it. Oh, how do you overcome that and get that confidence? Because I think it's really hard.
It is hard. And with my team, what we used to do is, there were a lot of people like this who couldn't do it up front. And what we would do is we'd go in we'll have a meeting room, and me and the person would just sit down together and just talk like as if you were just explaining to me what the idea was. So we wouldn't put them in a big scenario straight away in front of managers or anything like that. And it's just to slowly, present to me, or just talk to me about your ideas. Let's just talk about it. Where did you come from? And actually, when they talk about it and they talk about why or how they came up with it, why they came up with it, they naturally and then feel confident. And actually, when you say, well, that makes sense to me, great, you're not blagging it, you're kind of actually just telling me how you came up with it. And yeah, it does take time to build up, and unfortunately it is part of when you get a bit more senior that you need to express your ideas. But to be honest, again, nowadays with like online, there's a lot of online presentations and less hybrid working, does take, I think, the heat off it a little bit, because you can have a bunch of notes under your little screen, you can kind of be more prepared, so you can build that up over time. But it is practice. Ultimately, it is practice. But just do it privately, do it with people that you feel confident with, and just and have a framework. That's the other thing. Having a framework to say, okay, well, these are the 4 things I need to get across. Very simple. Why did I do this? What impact does it have? And why should it matter? Or something very simple to just get your 3 things in. Once you get started, then the functional things of, well, it's blue because of this, and it's white because of that, and it's this color. That's what easier to kind of convey. But it's always that starting point and the end bit that you have to get right, don't you? So having a framework, that will help.
I think as well, maybe a good question in an interview is to ask about the line management process, because then that will give you a sense of this. So if you know that you've got someone you're in constant contact with, then you know that you're going to have more sort of one-to-one conversations where you can explore ideas. Whereas if you get a sense that it's going to be you, one of many people in a department, and someone that you don't really see very much who's the boss, then actually that might put you in a situation where it's a bit harder and you've all of a sudden got to present to loads of people. But tell me about, I'm really interested in this, hybrid working, working remotely, not always being in the office, and the visual process, because I've been on Zoom calls watching people trying to collaboratively do a design together, and the whole process has made me want to jump out the window. It is so torturous. Whereas when you're in the actual office together, you can just lean over a desk and say, actually, why don't you move that bit there, move it down a bit, and you're waving your finger at the screen. Oh yeah, that bit, a bit lighter, a bit darker, and you're gesticulating a lot, and you're getting a real sense. How are you managing that, and what advice can you give to people when they're working remotely, how they can have a really productive visual process?
This is a big one. I am definitely an advocate of in the room kind of stuff. Maybe I'm a bit more traditional in that sense. But obviously I've had to adapt like anyone else, and even in my previous agency there was times when I had a team in Bristol, so I had 5 designers in Bristol, and we would always have to communicate over Teams and video calls, and I'd go down every quarter to see them. So that was a natural thing I had to learn and get a hold of. obviously the hierarchy helped there. There were senior designers helping the junior designers and things like that, and I'd kind of get involved. But now I would say, yeah, there's three things. Obviously, where you can, you get in the room and talk. But in the majority of times, you don't have this. I would say there's two things you could do. One is people using Miro nowadays. So I don't know if you've seen Miro. So it's a whiteboard. It's an online whiteboard. We use it a ton now for all our like collaboration. Right. Me and Jez collaborating with clients. It's a brilliant tool, really easy to use. So that's one way of doing it. So basically, you can put your designs in, you can kind of do little video chats around it, you can do post-it notes, you can draw things, you can do mood boards around it, you can do all that sort of stuff at real time as well, which is a good thing. And the other thing I'm now using is Loom. So I don't know if you've heard of Loom. So Loom is a piece of software which is just allows you to record videos or record your desktop with your face as well. So nowadays, people talking about meetings, instead of having a half an hour meeting, just do a 3-minute Loom call. Loom, so you're asynchronous as opposed to synchronous way of doing things. So you can, as a manager or a designer, I might kind of just look at the piece of design. I'll, put the Loom on and I'll kind of quickly go through it. And because I'm just verbalizing it, I'm literally, it's as if I'm talking to you, like, oh yeah, I really like this piece here. I think this could be blue, or this could be this, or have you thought about something else? And just coming across more casually and kind and clear, and you just record that video and you send it to the person, and they've then got a really nice kind of piece. They can look at it in their own time. They can reference it again because it's already there. They can see it's quite human because it's a video. It's not like this horrible written feedback. So that's one way of doing it, which does work and does help. And I have to do that with designers, associates that I work with, because I work with designers who are autonomous in that sense. So it's not kind of, I can tell them what to do. I can ask them that this is what I need, and they will do it in their own time. So actually having that asynchronous approach does work quite well, but it's very nicely captured in a video. So there's a few options there, but ultimately it is going to be Teams. It is going to be jump on a call. But again, having a bit more clarity in what you're going to say beforehand helps too. So
I think something I found is quite useful for me when people have started to work for me during the pandemic, naturally you've got a lot of questions, and you can feel, and I know this from someone that I was mentoring recently as well, she said that she felt that the only interaction that she had with the team was when she had a problem or an issue, or people would show her stuff over Zoom or Teams, and then if she didn't quite understand, that file was saved in that folder, whatever, then oh no, now I've got to go and ask someone. And so a tip that I found is really useful is that maybe when you first start a new role, then try and arrange like a little check-in every day at 4:30 or something like that, so you can make a note of any questions and queries as you go, and then you've blocked out that person's time, even just 20 minutes every day, and then you can check in with them. And also, even if you are fully remote, try and engineer it so you can go in regularly as well. So I was saying to this girl, she's a previous bootcamp as well, it's lovely. And so I was saying, well, even if there isn't a precedent for going in, why don't you say you're going to go in every Wednesday? And then that acts like a magnet, and other people think, oh, I'll go in every Wednesday as well. So you're building up this bank of positive interactions that are nothing to do with issues and problems and not getting it, and that really helped. And then because she was worried that she might not make it through her 3-month probation, and she was saying, but I would normally be fully confident by now. And then that really helped. Okay, so that's a little bit on soft skills. And of course, any questions you've got, stick them in chat and we can tackle them at the end. Let's talk about the big stuff. I'm really interested in what you were saying about CVs. So I'd love you to talk us through your thoughts on what makes a good CV covering letter. First of all, and then we'll look at interviews. So CVs and covering letters. What makes your heart sing, and what makes you put it on the nice but no pile?
I think I'd say like something that just piques my interest, right? Like I think when I get something that is written, the headline is decent as well. Like the subject line is just intriguing. If somebody said something about maybe who they are. Just as an example, when I applied for my job to Omobono, which is my last company I didn't talk about, but I simply put in there, knowing exactly the issues that the creative director would have, i.e. finding talent, I just put talent 0.6 miles away, because I was 0.6 miles away from this place, and I just put talent, and I knew exactly what he would think, because that is hard to find talent in Cambridge. So I just wrote that, and basically within the week I got the job, because I went in, I think it was sent it on like a Monday, and Tuesday or Wednesday I was in, Thursday I was chatting to their management team, and by Friday I got the job. And it was just simple things like that. And actually, interestingly, at that time, I didn't even send a CV. I used LinkedIn as my CV.
Okay.
So that's something else I was going to mention, back to the personal brand piece, because people are doing it in a way, because if the LinkedIn is quite an interesting way to look at it, because actually it shows how much interaction you've had with people. Maybe you got a recommendation from your previous teacher, or a recommendation from your part-time job, or little things like that. And you've actually built that up. You've taken time to do an about section where you fill that in. You've shown you might be a volunteer somewhere. So actually LinkedIn is quite a great way as a template to fill that in, and it almost then reflect that, because you can actually export that as a CV as well. Anyway, so that's just on the CV. But yeah, the cover letter, I think it just needs to show, for me, just personality around yourself, like why you're looking to join. But you need to know that it's not generic copy and paste, because you can tell, and and they've probably done that because they just changed the one tweaky bit, but they've not actually looked at your company. Maybe that's just the bias on my own part, but I would like for them to have seen R&B, understood it a little bit more. Maybe they pulled out, I really like the case study on that client, or I can see that you're working on this sort of stuff, and I can see myself. And actually, when people put cover letters together that actually put themselves in your company, I think that's quite powerful as well, because they almost go, I can see myself doing this with you, or I'd love to get involved in this. It just shows that they've kind of maybe taken a bit more notice and understood how they actually fit as well. So I think that's the kind of cover letter I'm looking for.
I really like getting this point across to people, because now that I'm on the other side of it, and I've certainly been on, the job application side of it in many, many times. I was explaining at the beginning of the week my experience with redundancy. I've certainly been on the other side of the table. Yeah. And what you don't realise is actually loads of people out there, they're just sending a copy and paste. I was saying about how people write to me and call me sir and that kind of thing. They're not paying any attention. They're just sort of sending the same thing to everybody. And quite often I'll get an application for maybe a copywriter role, and the CV still says aspiring designer, And I think, well, you're wasting your time, But if you've got someone who treats the job spec as a brief, and then writes a covering letter around it, then that is your route in. Because if I'm, also, so let's say you've got a copywriter role, but in a branding agency, so you need someone who does this, has that skill, and wants to do this, and then the covering letter you get meets all of that kind of criteria, then you're instantly thinking, well, they're a brilliant fit.
Read it. Exactly that. Yeah. It's just taking that extra bit of understood the nuance of what you're coming in for. No point being a designer for a brand agency, then you go, I've got lots of digital skills, or I've got some sort of I can do lots of print, and you're like, well, I thought we're a digital agency and you're talking about print, or and I think it just needs to marry up.
It feels so obvious, doesn't it? So it almost feels like, is it really this easy? And actually it is, and other people aren't doing it. And the other thing that people aren't doing is, just like you're saying, they're not spending time to research the company. And if you mention that, it almost feels like you're sucking up to them in some way. Whereas you and me, we're up all night, thinking about our businesses and really care about it. You don't want some arrogant person walking in who's, not taking any time to look at you and what you do, because A, it's not good for us as business owners. But then B, that they'll be like that with clients, and they won't do their research, and they won't care about the output. So it's amazing how few people do that. And it's either because they can't be bothered, or it's either because they think, oh no, it makes you look like I'm sucking up to the employer. But please do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think on that point of fit is really important. I've had so many CVs, but this is, again, maybe specific scenario, but people come to me and go, well, I can design and I can develop, or I can develop and I can design. And in our field before, is developing and design is such a big difference. Either you're a really great developer, you're a really great designer. And so again, back to this idea of fit as a manager, and as within the structure that we had, I have to go, well, if I'm hiring a designer, I need to be able to hire a really good designer. I don't really need the other skills. But then they might come and go, but I want to, maybe in a few years I want to be able to do development. And straight away you're in this kind of dilemma as a manager, like where does this person fit? They've got these skills, but they've not kind of helped me understand where they fit, or be clear about what their primary objective is. Yes, you might have the additional skills and you have to position it that way. So be clear on what you want to be. Like if you're coming in, you go to a social media agency, then you need to set up my top 3 skills for social media agency is, writing, designing, or strategy, or marketing strategy, or something like that. Or I can use the social tools. Or if you're a copywriter, then, okay, these are my subject matters. I'm a long form writer, a short form writer, I'm an advertising writer. Yeah, just getting those things right. Be careful not to go too generic, because the manager won't know where to fit you in their piece.
You might feel that's helpful to say, I can do a bit of this, I can do a bit of that. But in a way, you kind of want someone a bit more niche instead of a jack of all trades, don't you?
Yeah, definitely, especially if you're applying for a particular type of agency. I think you should be applying for a particular department, or within the idea of having a particular kind of job there, and help the manager go, this person would be a great fit for this. But if it's really broad, they're just going to get this kind of CV and go, I'm not really sure if this person too broad for the specific thing I have, or do I still interview them knowing that they might be good for that specific thing and the rest is just a bonus? You're in the dilemma of, that's not as easy decision for me to make, but there's 3 other CVs here I can definitely interview. So you go in the maybe pile.
The other thing as well, and I've mentioned this in marketing terms throughout the week, is about touch points. And I think it's important to think about touch points with your application as well. So if you're going to Raj, you've discovered R&B, you think this looks like an amazing place to work, I really want to send in my CV and impress him. It's a design branding agency. It's very visual. So if you send it in Times New Roman, and it's just going to look awful. And it says, that kind of thing says to me, this person is only a designer kind of on paper. They don't live and breathe it. And that's what you want to see, not necessarily to the extent that you've got this huge long thing that's 20 meg and like you say, it's got the 7 out of 10 Photoshop, whatever. But you do want to see someone that cares about the presentation, don't you? And then for me as well, the emails, sometimes I get emails sent to me that someone has clearly tapped out on their phone on a Saturday night while they're watching X Factor or something, and for a copywriting job. And I wrote back to someone, because I always write back and give them helpful advice. I'm not just going to delete it, but please capitalize I. You're coming to me for a copywriting job. I need to know that I is going to be capitalized, and Sue has got a capital letter as well. And I just wonder, it's so tough out there. People are really struggling to find work sometimes, so pay attention to those little details. So
the marginal gains, that's what it's all about nowadays. Everyone's on the same level. It's just that little 1%, 2% across the top, which is just piques your interest. I mean, I've had CVs in the past where people have sent me chocolate, people have sent me printed pieces, which are really interesting, and it's very traditional. Often illustrators do this, I've noticed, because the way they want to get across literally something that you can see, something you can feel, and I've received things which definitely have piqued my attention because it lands on your desk and it's the only thing that's physical. Everything else is around you, and you kind of look at these things, and again,
do you recommend that? Because sometimes I get something sent to me where it's done in lovely card and it opens up like that, or I don't know, do you? But I find, where am I going to put it? It's really, then I feel terrible. Where am I physically going to put this thing? Whereas all the other applications are coming through digital channels, and I've got them in a folder, and I'm organising my recruitment admin. And then someone who's wonderful sends me this other thing, and I it's lovely. Anyway, but I'm less of a designer.
I don't mind getting it.
What do you
for
think?
me, it's about the fit again. So what will happen is, unfortunately, what might happen in that scenario is, again, the illustrator, this is, I don't know, there's a couple of illustrators here, and it's just something to kind of maybe think about, is illustration is a tricky one in the sense that there's very limited agencies that probably have in-house illustrators, because it's a job that you might need for certain things. Whereas if you're an illustrator for a card company or a greeting card company or a children's book, that's more of a permanent role. So I think when I get the CVs or a piece like that, it's often probably 9 times out of 10 that the style is never going to fit what you're currently doing. So I'm working for Centre Park, so I'm working for Accenture, and I get this really pretty, really nice illustrative thing, but it's like a 1 in 100, 1 in 500 chance that I might use that style for something that we're going to be doing. So again, it's about context and the right fit. So once I got it and she got the attention, it's going to be that same thing. Yeah, where does this fit? Oh, I'll keep it on file because it might be useful, but it's going to be a tricky one to do that. So I would say there's some merit in doing. I'd say probably if you're applying for an advertising agency, to send something potentially physical or interesting, a DM still is an advertising piece. So direct mail effectively is still very effective. And in the advertising world,
printed out and sent through the post.
Printed, yeah, correct. Direct mail, yes. Sorry, my terminology. That would work. So to me, if you're an advertising agent, somebody sends you something like that, that's within their sphere and their world of like, okay, some sort of piece that might come through the post for somebody, it might make sense. So again, it's contextual. You're applying for something physical in a digital agency, you'll get noticed, but then if it's illustrative or something like that, it might not be used in a digital agency. So
yeah,
there's being noticed, but then being used is two different things.
That's what I found, because I have occasionally had people turn up on the doorstep with a physical portfolio. And even sort of on paper, I really like the idea because that's going the extra mile. But then in practical terms, and this is purely for me, it's actually put me under a bit of pressure because I've been in the middle of a meeting and then all of a sudden I've got someone on the doorstep. You know, I like to manage the process properly and not just suddenly sort of be surprised like that. But that's purely me, and other agencies might really like that and see that as a positive sign. And on, you know, it is good because I like the idea that there's someone that is going to be happy to go and see clients, pick up the phone. So yeah, it's a tricky one. And tell me about portfolios. So what's the modern approach to portfolios? What works for you nowadays?
For me, simple is best. So two things. I'm happy to receive a PDF, which is attached to the covering letter. It's a simple PDF. It tells me about who you are, very high level detail about your work history, but like more kind of, again, impact, like I was here at this agency, or I did this and I'm doing something now. And then literally like case studies, but presented in a really nice, compelling way, which showcases, from the challenge that we had, this is the solution, and potentially some results. Now, again, I know those of you not probably started might not have that fully there, but even again, giving context, like what is this piece of work? Was it a proactive brief? Was it a brief from the university? What was the context of that? And still try and present it in a modern, smart way. Like go to agencies' websites, see how they mock up things, look at the mock-ups they have. You can get them free on Canva and places like that. So try and present your work in a way that looks compelling, make it look like it was real, like it's out there in the world, sort of thing. So I'd say PDF portfolio like that is important. And again, don't over bombard me. I just want like the top 3 to 5 projects or 3 to 5 pieces of work, each one being maybe 3 slides max, like this, here's the brief and then here's the work and then maybe some results or something like that, very simple. And then number 2, like I said before, I think having a simple website doesn't have to be complicated, the website, because I don't believe the website needs to be complicated. The website is a canvas for your work. So the website can be super simple, just have your name, a couple of things about us, my work, contact. That's all you need. They have a one-pager where you've just got your projects going down. So it's a real simple scroll for people. If you don't have a lot of work, maybe just have it as a one-pager. And again, just present it really nicely. And again, all this stuff is so accessible to people now. If you websites, you should be able to get free ones, or a Wix website or a WordPress one, and just create something really simple. So again, for the manager, for the hiring manager, it's very simple. Click on the PDF, it opens up, I'll scroll straight away, get this impact. I can get a flavor for that person immediately within 30 seconds, or click on the website and have a little scroll. And again,
how do you feel about things like Behance, or maybe
Behance is fine. Exactly. I mean, free websites.
Yeah.
Insta is okay. I'd say probably hard to see the size of the work and the way it's presented potentially. But Insta might be good if you're doing video and things like that. So if you're, again, a website, it's useful for that, where you've actually got video pieces. So Behance, because it's part of Adobe, it's free and you've got portfolio there. Anything like that where it's just kind of the work itself is presented well. It's kind of got context in terms of what it's about, and then how it's housed on a website in a PDF, like think of it like that, in terms
actually,
of context.
that makes me think of just one quick thing. We're going to go into interviews now, but one quick soft skill when it comes to designers. I love designers who name their their files properly, you know, that have got good, very organized with their content, and they send it to you in a way that is very helpful. So it might be a fresh email, for example, and then you've got the name of the version in there, and it's all V1, V2, V3. Whereas sometimes some designers that we work with can be a bit sort of haphazard with it. So
final.
That really definitely the final version this time, and then it's buried in an email, you know, 13 emails in. Whereas if you can use like InVision or something like that for more of a centralized place for sharing versions, that's really helpful. Anyway, I love that. I love
that's
people
good.
that manage their files properly and name them properly. And it's an underrated skill, I think.
Yeah, it's super important in organization as a creative. It's a massively important skill.
Because otherwise you end up giving feedback on a draft that's, you know, three drafts back. Anyway, but that was just a minor thing. I just suddenly thought,
good.
Right, just to sort of finish up. And then if anyone's got any questions, we can do that. So interviews. So someone has sent you a beautiful CV. You think they're a great fit. Portfolio looks lovely. And now they're having the interview. So what are those things that you want to come across in an interview?
Yeah, again, for me, it's about who you are. You know, that's the number one thing. Like, who are you? Let's get that across. Bring your full self to the interview. I don't like interviews that are overly formal initially as well. Like, whilst I'm probably doing a formal approach, I think I think that's for the manager to kind of approach it in that way to make it comfortable. We've even asked people how they would like the interview. Are you okay, like in a meeting room? Do you prefer to? I mean, if this is my personal thing, but do you prefer to meet, you know, in a coffee shop or something a bit more, you know, low key that allows you to kind of be yourself and talk us through things. And then I guess the interview itself is for me, it's kind of the backstory as to why they're here, and we're showing the passion, you know, why do you want to be in this industry? Number one, why do you want to work for us? You know, number two, what are your aspirations over the next few years? Like, what is this, a stepping stone? Is this really what you want to do? Is this just because you just need a job? What let's get to the bottom of what you're trying to achieve here. If it's someone slightly a bit more senior, we'll kind of dig into the previous history, because for me, it's quite important, you know, people have had agency experience, if it's a second or third job, for example. So digging into that and understanding what made them tick, because all those nuances are, okay, so you didn't like really business to business work, but you're really good at this. For me as well, I'm quite a conceptual designer. So for me, strategic writing and design is all kind of comes together. So I'm looking for people, again, asking about that side of things. As I said before, do you understand the commerciality of what you do? And getting the answers from that, you know, just even if it's just high level understanding what the impact of their work has, I think it's really important to get across. And then really the rest of it, obviously we'll go through the portfolio, and I would be listening out for how they present their work. So I'll probably be quiet most of the time and just let them talk through. And I'll probably say, you know, explain it to me as if, you know, you presented it to a client or your creative director before, or, you know, can you explain it to me, you know, in that sense, as opposed to well, it's blue and it's green and it's, you know, don't describe it, explain what it does. Is quite important again. And then really the end of it would be, I guess, a bit more casual, you know, like what you're expecting from a role, what kind of things do you like? Do you like working with people? Is it a team kind of role you're looking for, etc.? So just getting a flavor of that. So the start, but, you know, the why is really important, and the what they do, you know, how they do things. Back to this way I think about strategy, those 4 questions. It's almost like placing that on that person and you know, just working through it that way. But I would just say, yeah, be yourself, you know, don't try to kind of mask anything. I think there's no point, you know, because I think, you know, when you get into the onboarding and it's like you didn't mention something, or it's just going to go wrong on both parties, isn't it? So I think it's just best to be upfront about things. Like I've had people in the past say they can do web design, and they omitted to almost, so I had a default view that, okay, well, webs at the time was done in Photoshop. This was a while back. And when they came on board, they said, oh, I can't use Photoshop. I can only do website design in Illustrator. And I'll be like, oh no. And it became a big learning curve, and it just couldn't do it because it doesn't work like that. because it's a scalable format, etc. So there's little nuances like that. So I think it's worth checking between each other. And like you said earlier, so you're like, so what software are you used to using? What did you design that on? And just to be clear on those kind of things, because if they turned out they designed their whole portfolio in Canva, well, if they're that good, that's amazing. But I think it's it's worth checking those sorts of things as well, aligning on that.
A thing that I'm looking out for, and I'm very influenced by this book. Do you know a guy called Scott Belsky? He was, I think he founded Behance, and then he went on to become head of creative director or something similar, head of product, I think, at Adobe. And he's written his book called The Messy Middle. So there's lots of stuff out there about startups and lots of stuff about selling a company and not so much about the middle bits. And he pinpointed something which I think I've always done instinctively. So it's quite nice to kind of see someone writing it down, that what you actually want is someone who's hungry to learn, not someone who has ticked all the boxes already. And I would much rather someone says to me, okay, I love designing websites and I know the structure behind it and all of that, but I've mostly been doing it in Illustrator, not Photoshop. But what I'll do is go, if that's what you need me to do between now and the job starting, I will learn.
Learn it.
That's much better, isn't it?
Instead that's back to the attitude.
Way through.
Yeah. It is about the attitude. Like, what are you willing to do? Where are you willing to get to? Yeah, that's really important.
Yeah. And then I think some of the most helpful advice on job interviews that anyone gave me, this is quite a few years ago, but it's always been really useful. So instead of trying to second guess what the questions are going to be and then preparing answers to them, which will really throw you if someone asks you a different question, or, I've been in interview situations where I've been doing the interview where someone has accidentally, people quite often do this, kind of end up talking their way down this quite negative cul-de-sac. And you can see them getting further and further, and you can almost see them thinking, why am I telling this story? So don't take that approach. Before an interview, put together your top 5. So your best 5 projects or your best 5, any of your sort of highlights in your career. And then whatever question people ask you, you can always kind of find a way to, so the end point is one of these brilliant moments. So someone says to you that horrible strengths and weaknesses question, you can think about that beautiful project that you designed and kind of say, I don't know, somehow twist it round so that's where you end up. Or have you ever had a time where you've had to deal with conflict? Yeah, on this absolutely brilliant project that I worked on, it was really great. Yeah, then, along the way we had a bit of conflict, but the outcome was this really good thing. So that's so helpful, because otherwise you're just sweating. What are they going to ask me? Oh, I think they'll ask me this. Well, of course they'll ask you something different. You can't predict it.
And I'm the same. You had a few questions. I wrote a few notes down, but we've got plenty here. But I've not even looked at it. But it's just kind of what because you work through that as well. Hopefully, just retain some of that, and you just kind of come back to things like that. So it's really
otherwise, later on you're thinking, oh, why did I talk about that thing? Why didn't I? I could have talked about that amazing thing I did. So if you storytelling, I just found that really useful.
I do love stories. Stories they do get you into places. I think I remember when I first tried to get into university, and it was the same thing, right? Thousands of students, the same portfolio.
Yeah.
And really, I remember the tutors just going, "Tell me about yourself. Tell me what you do outside of work." And I kind of reeled off a ton of things. I was in the Scouts. I met the Queen. I did this. I used to play the doubler. They were just like, "Wow, that's great, yeah." And I think they just remembered me for that beyond the portfolio after a little while, because after a while, there's probably going to be, 30 slots, but 500 CVs which are just as good as each other. And actually, at the end of the day, it's that kind of connection that you make with people that's really important.
And what sort of questions should people ask at the end? Because I think it is very good to come prepared with like 3 or 4.
That's a huge one for me. When I say, have you got any questions, and they don't have any questions, that's a bit of a flag for me to some degree. It's a flag that, again, what have they not checked? Are they perfect? They have no questions, or they've not been able to process what this job is that they're about. So I don't have any specific. I mean, I would ask, if they ask me, like, what's a day in the life like at the company? That's really, because that gives me a way to kind of express, what a typical day looks like or a week looks like. That's a good question to probably ask. I think it's worth asking about. Flexibility is worth asking about. Responsibilities, so you're clear on where things lie. Is it other people in the team? Is how big's the other team? Am I going to be mentored? Am I going to have a line manager? and you would understand for yourself what's good for you. Again, like my story at the start, well, am I going to be the only designer? Can I handle it? So I think those kind of questions are important, and maybe some visionary questions. I think asking a company, where they're going and where you might fit shows some sort of interesting, I guess, commitment to some degree is what you're looking for as well from people, aren't you? As a manager, you're looking for some sort of commitment, because you don't want to hire someone just for 6 months. You're looking for a longer term employee. So things like that shows what they're thinking about. They might ask about career progression as well. How does it work here? Like I said before, not all companies are about hierarchy. It might be about you just get better, but we're a flat structure, but you just become more of an expert in what you do, for example. So understanding that as well is quite important.
I think it's no bad thing to write the questions down as well.
Of course,
that wouldn't bother me if someone had said to me, "Oh, I knew I'd forget them at the end because it's an interview situation, so I've written them down." That's fine,
That's
and
even
equally,
better.
sometimes people say, "Oh, I did have some questions, but you've answered them all," which I know is really difficult because you think, "Oh, but I have these really good questions." But in that instance, then you could say, "Well, I was going to ask you about day in a life because I found that interesting because of this, but you've answered it," so it's genuine. But I do like it if someone says, "What's a typical day look like?" Because that says to me that they're actually picturing themselves doing the role. It's quite good to ask about your like line management, who will you be working with most closely, what you're saying about career progression and where's this company going. And one of the best questions I've had over the last year or so is what someone that said, "Well, what are you most proud of during this pandemic period?" I thought, oh, that's an interesting question. And then I felt, well, I did. That's what I said. I said, out of all of I said about some of the client work, but I said, actually, I'm really proud that we managed to do this. And it was really interesting. And I felt a bit like I was suddenly being interviewed, but it showed that the person was genuinely interested. And it kind of suggested that they had standards too, that they weren't just going to rock up and just go to any old company, which then you kind of want that, don't you, in team members?
Yeah, definitely.
That want the best. So I thought that was interesting.
I think one question that I would ask as a manager as well is quite a good one. What does a good day look like for you? So, if they, for me, I'd be happy, concentrating on my writing or whatever. So I like to interact. So you get a gist of, oh, great. So they'll be up for meetings, they'll be up for, they prefer to kind of, focusing on something, or because I think that's a good question to ask and know about the way they would want to function as well. Because it's a bit more, but there's a lot of things around personality types nowadays. I don't know if you come across lots of disc profiles. There's like color profiles now. There's all sorts of things that are happening in businesses where they map, oh, you're a blue kind of person, so blues only work really well with yellows, and you're a red kind of person. But they're doing kind of things like that, which is really, really interesting.
That's very visual then.
Yeah, it is very visual.
So what's your I don't know, I like doing things in odd numbers, so maybe 1 tip or 3 tips, but so people that want to get ahead in more sort of visual creative industries, what would you suggest, just to kind of wrap things up?
I guess I'm going to leave it at that. Whilst you want to get into the visual, I think you need to know the verbal and you need to know business. So I think be an informed designer, be a balanced designer, be someone who understands the impact of their design on the world. And that's how I'd kind of position it. Like, don't just live in the design world, let's see what impact you can have. And I think that's, if you can express that, then I think that's quite powerful.
That's brilliant. That's really good. Right. Well, thank you ever so much.